Hello, beautiful community. I'm going to do something I don't want to do because quite a few of you have asked me to say a few words about the controversy around Alexei Arestovych and his resignation from the symbolic role of advisor to the office of president. Now, let's get the basics right here. Arestovych isn't a victim of the terroristic bombardment that happened in Dnipro. Arestovych, in case you're not aware, went on air and said that it wasn't a Russian missile that fell of its own accord, but it was a Russian missile that fell following a clash with a surface-to-air Ukrainian missile. And the problem wasn't just that that wasn't true. The problem was that the way Arestovych arrived at that proclamation was not commensurate with the level of seriousness of what's being talked about and the political consequences of it. So what Aristotle said got picked up by the Russian state and by Russian propaganda and used against Ukraine. But Arestovych is not the victim. Here the victims are the victims. And there is something else that's really important, and that's that otherworldly horror that you see actually is a horror where, nevertheless, people come to rescue and dig in the rubble and get people out or get bodies out. In parts of Ukraine and in Mariupol, the same story happened, but not before our eyes and without rescue for anybody. So that comes first. Then media politics comes second, so let's talk about it a bit. Obviously, it goes without saying that if Arestovych had checked what he was saying more properly, and if he had been right, then this would in no way be Ukraine's fault. I mean, what are you going to do when you're under the terroristic bombardment of your imperialistically aggressive neighbor? You're going to have to use air defense. And of course, that's going to have unpredictable consequences. So Arestovych isn't right, but even if he were right, that wouldn't in any way make Ukraine culpable of anything improper in its actions to defend its citizens and its territory. But the context that's worth understanding here is that apart from Zelensky, no representative of the Ukrainian state has done more since the beginning of the war, and Arestovych is indirectly only a representative of the Ukrainian state, but nevertheless has done more since the beginning of the war to advantage Ukraine in the informational environment. And not just in the Russian-speaking informational environment, where he was watched by millions, but in a global informational environment. It's stunning how often you would just see Arestovych, appearing in translation on different channels, networks all over the world. And the effect that Arestovych had was twofold. Externally, he helped communicate a message that helped Ukraine win information war globally. And internally, at least at the beginning of the war, he helped to calm a lot of people down. There's plenty of Ukrainians who never liked him. But this extraordinary calming effect that he had on a lot of people. And we're putting aside Arestovich's motivations, and certainly there's vanity there, and there's a certain kind of romantic desire to realize his own life project, and that somehow comes together with doing what he thinks will maximally advantage Ukraine in its pursuit of military victory. So that's Arestovych roughly, and he'll carry on now, but his standing will be a little diminished by this, because people will no longer take him to be speaking for Ukraine in quite the same way after he let go of his position. But he'll still continue speaking to an enormous audience and continue to be very successful. But what is this about? Backing out of Arestovych? What kind of why I've decided to say a couple of words, even though I have nothing interesting to say, but why have I decided to say a couple of words about this in response to the questions that came in? Because this is a conversation about solidarity and civic health in Ukraine, not just at wartime, but fast forward to a time when Ukraine has succeeded in some kind of approximation of winning the war. What happens after? How does Ukraine develop as a democratic order? And here, issues of solidarity, issues around the country's capacity to speak to itself really, really matter. And that sort of partly spontaneous, partly orchestrated horde going after Arestovych, it isn't an ideal social manifestation. It's not very healthy. And I turned on different social media platforms. I just put in Arestovych very briefly, and I could typically see tweets calling Arestovych a fraud and asking for him not to be taken seriously by anybody, suggesting that everybody should unfollow him, often followed, in fact, by commentary on another bit of news that's doing the rounds, and that there's a campaign, and Navalny's daughter is involved in this, a campaign to liberate Navalny out of jail. Now, you might say, what use is that going to have? Well, it might have some. Might not achieve the outcome, but of course it might have some use. And of course, I saw several people saying next to and follow Arestovych, well, there's no point in this campaign to liberate Navalny, because how is freeing Navalny from jail going to help Ukraine's war effort? If you think that that's a clever rhetorical question to ask, then you are caught up in a kind of performative bubble that's at a distance from practical political reality. I mean, all about this. This happens all over Western countries too. So that's my commentary. My commentary is basically that it's very important to keep having a serious conversation about solidarity and democratic health as we encourage Ukraine to visualize itself constructively post-war. And it's also healthy to acknowledge that whatever you think of Arestovych, his actual contribution toward Ukraine standing, toward Ukraine winning the information war, has been enormous. And it's quite wrong to go around with the thought, well, there's this, there's that, and then there's Arestovych. Well, no. Take away Arestovych and you realize that he is a really freakish phenomenon. And that part of the reason his contribution has been so big is because he is in many ways freakishly gifted. And that, I think, has been insufficiently acknowledged. And acknowledging it does not require to paint Arestovych as some kind of a saint. So I am planning on the main channel to begin introducing slightly more casual content, a little bit less produced. It's more compatible with my very limited health. And in that light, tomorrow or the day after, but possibly tomorrow, you're going to see, I think, an important but just slightly more lightly produced episode. So lots of love and talk very soon, here, there, everywhere.